Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Hashim Kumar. Leaders from Europe, including Ukraine and the UK, gathered in Paris in the Weimar Plus format to discuss and coordinate critical defence strategies and long-term support for Ukraine. Combined with the upcoming Munich Security Conference and rising geopolitical tensions, what is the significance for Europe's security? Well, to explore Europe's unity, challenges and the future, we are joined by Roland Freudenstein. He's co-founder of the Brussels Freedom Hub. Mr. Freudenstein, welcome back to TVP World. Thanks for taking the time.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. So, the Weimar Plus format, we see Ukraine and the United Kingdom involved in that conversation. The aim is to coordinate the European stance before the Munich Security Conference. What do you think that stance is going to look like?
Well, it's very difficult because the Europeans feel a little bit steamrolled by Donald Trump's direct diplomacy with Vladimir Putin and then Volodymyr Zelensky in that sequence. And that's already indicative of the problem that we're facing here. So a unified stance will have to be worked out as soon as possible. But right now, there is a bit of chaos in Europe, I must say, as a reaction to yesterday's news about the direct talks.
Absolutely. I want to talk in detail about the conversations that President Trump had with both Putin and Zelensky in just a second. But there did seem to be unity between NATO and the US in terms of their support for Ukraine, in terms of both agreeing that defense budgets need to go up, with the goal being 5% of GDP. Tell us a little bit about what you took from those conversations.
Well, of course, there's general agreement about supporting Ukraine, continuing to support Ukraine, but we remember very well how Defense Secretary Hegseth yesterday, actually in Brussels, in parallel to the Paris talks, said very clearly that the overwhelming part of military support for Ukraine will now have to come from the Europeans. Now, what does overwhelming mean? That, I think, will be the critical question. And until we know what the Europeans understand by this, or a fair share of their support for Ukraine, and what the Americans understand by it, we don't know whether there's absolute unity. Of course, there is agreement that defense spending has to go up. I don't think there are many European governments that consider 5% of GDP for defense as a realistic spending target. I mean, even Poland, with a very, very benevolent way of looking at it and counting, Poland gets to 4.7%, but for most other European countries, 5% is out of the question. By the way, even the United States is quite considerably below 5%.
Indeed. Talking about Europe shouldering its fair share of the burden, I mean, this is something that Donald Trump has been calling for since the beginning of his presidential campaign. Has Europe in any way prepared for the eventuality, you know, that he got into power? Has it started to put its pieces together to make that happen?
I think there have been attempts. I think they didn't go far enough. And I think that Europe doesn't have a concrete figure that it could put on the table right now as the future European contribution to transatlantic security in general and to Ukraine's defense in particular. So, well, what I would definitely add here is that President Trump, like on so many other things, has a very one-sided way of looking at the facts. And the facts are that Europe has been outspending the US in both economic and financial assistance to Ukraine and military assistance to Ukraine for more than a year and a half, for more than half of the time that the Ukraine war has lasted so far. So that is something that President Trump consistently gets wrong, claiming that so far the US has been doing far more than Europe. That is just plainly not true.
Understood, although one does get the sense that he's playing to his domestic audience on that particular point. Let's talk now about President Trump's conversations, first with Putin, an hour and a half long. They've agreed, it seems, to meet in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia. Talk us through what you think happened there.
Well, you know, many people are now have been saying since yesterday evening that Trump has thrown Ukraine under the bus. I think that's an oversimplification, and I think it's too rash to say that. However, Putin has scored a diplomatic victory very simply by the fact that Trump called him first and then Zelensky. So Ukraine is an ally of the US and the West, and Putin is an adversary of the US and the West. And yet Trump calls Putin first. That's the first thing that went wrong. Secondly, I believe before negotiations even start, to take NATO membership for Ukraine off the table, even without giving a timeline or something, like say for 5 years or for 10 years or something. No, just taking it off the table. And at the same time saying that, yeah, there may be peacekeeping troops in Ukraine, but those have to be Europeans and non-Europeans, but non-US. And definitely they will not be covered by any NATO security guarantee. I mean, if I put all these concessions together that have happened before negotiations even start, I'd say that's a second big diplomatic victory for Putin. But here's my third point. The jury is out whether we're going to have peace by Easter or whatever the pundits are predicting at the moment. I think the standpoints, the points of view, the positions between Putin and the entire West, and that includes the US, are still very far apart. And we will have to see whether...
But Roland, do you think... Sorry to interrupt you, it's just we've only got a couple of minutes left. Do you think that by taking NATO off the table for Ukraine, it actually helped bring Putin to the negotiating table, without which, of course, nothing could move forward? That might simply be a negotiating tactic by Trump. Now, related to NATO membership and security guarantees, of course, that's very important to Zelensky, and it's related to what Treasury Secretary Bessent said about a security guarantee or security assurances for Ukraine if a deal is done with the rare earth metals that Ukraine has made available as a bargaining chip for weaponry from the United States. What do you think Bessent meant by a security guarantee or a security blanket, if you like, coming from that?
Idea. Honestly, right now, no one knows exactly what security guarantees could consist in, unless the United States pledges something which is equivalent to the Article 5 security guarantee within NATO. Now, if it's not that, if NATO is taken off the table, if the US says that it's not going to put troops on the ground and it's not going to cover for any European troops based in Ukraine, then I honestly have no idea what these security guarantees could amount to. Of course, France and Britain have nuclear weapons of their own, but these are as a means of last resort for the defense of British and French territory. They don't cover any other countries, not seriously.
But I should imagine that the US would want to protect its investment and its source of supply for those rare earths. certainly against Chinese influence. But as you say, we shall wait and see how everything pans out over the next few weeks. Roland Freudenstein, thank you so much for sharing your analysis with our audience. Have a good day, sir.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye now. And that's all from us in this episode of World Talks. Goodbye.